أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear viewers, to the show. Think about it. As you can tell, that today's topic is quite interesting. The value of money. We're going to be talking about a story, as we always do. And this time's story is about a young boy named Faris. So, Faris was about 6 or 7 years old, and Eid time was approaching. Now, all his life during Eid, he would get candy, toys, some form of a gift. And so now he was 7 years old, and Eid was coming again. So he was excited about getting some gifts at the end of the fasting period. So Eid came, they went, they prayed the Salat al-Eid, they came back home, they had sweets, they met a few people, family, friends, and one gentleman who was a family friend, apparently Faris' uncle, he came up to Faris and he said, "Faris, you're 7 years old now, you're a big boy." And Faris smiled. So his uncle reached in his pocket and he took out some money. And he gave Faris some money. He gave him a note of about $5. And so Faris looks at this paper, turns it around, flips it around, and he says, "Why are you giving me this?" And so Faris' uncle says, "Oh, son, you can go out and you can buy things with it." He's like, "I can buy things with a piece of paper? I mean, I've heard about money, but I can buy things with this?" So Faris had a few questions. And so he asked his uncle. He said that, if I have something valuable, how can this piece of paper make me own it? So Faris' uncle laughed and said that, "Son, this piece of paper is actually representing value. So there's value in the bank, or there's value wherever money is kept, and this piece of paper that you have with you represents that value." So Faris is like, "Oh, okay. So can I go to the bank, give them this piece of paper, and get the value?" And Faris' uncle said, "That's interesting. I don't think you can." And Faris said, "Why? If you said this represents value, I should be able to go to the bank, give them this piece of note, and get whatever value it represents." And his uncle's like, "Well, bullion doesn't work that way." And Faris said, "What does bullion mean?" Bullion is anything of value. So for example, today we deal with paper currency, paper money. In some countries you have plastic, but it's the same concept. Prior to paper money and prior to all these things, how did people go about this earth, buying things, purchasing things, and living? So long time ago, I'm talking about 2000 BC, I'm talking about even prior to that, people used to barter things. So I would give you something of value. This has a particular value. And when I would give this to you, you would give me something of equivalent value, a little more value or less value, which was called bartering. So you would exchange goods in order to get something, and then you would move on with your life. People in the marketplace, people who were farmers, people who were blacksmiths, goldsmiths, and different types of workers, they used to do this quite often. They used to trade in their goods, whatever they had made or whatever they had grown in their farms, they used to give that out in the market, and they used to get something in return. And that was the general policy of how things used to take place. Later on in life, some materials were known to be precious, such as gold, silver, bronze, ivory, and all these other materials, different types of precious metals as well. So what people started doing is that these metals used to construct buildings, and they used to look shiny and good, and people used to be mesmerized by it. So they started using these materials to go off and trade, because those materials had value. Later on, let's go down to when coins were created. So we have to go down to the year 600 to 900. I'm talking about the 7th century up until the 10th century. When we go to China, the Chinese invented the coin. Of course, they didn't invent bullion. Gold, copper, silver, all these things were available worldwide, but they invented the concept of making coins. So what they did is they would take gold, they would have a machine or some form of a blacksmith or someone who had that skill and able to flatten it out and make a gold sterling or a silver sterling coin out of it. and then that coin would have a value. So if you have a smaller piece of gold or a bigger coin or one that's bigger than that. And they used to go out in the market and then trade with it. And they used to give it up because it had some value, and they used to get something in return for it. They could buy water, food, grains, crops, and different things. And that's basically how people came up with coins. Now, you'd be surprised to know that China started this in the 7th century. And they had to continue it up until the 10th century. These were the two dynasties by the name of Tang and Song. These two dynasties pretty much took this trend and made it something that is standard. But Europe and other countries only followed them in the 17th century, which means 700 years later. So European people started making coins as well. Now what would happen is that people would have coins, they'd go to the market. Now sometimes you need a lot of coins, so your baggage or whatever clothes you're wearing, the pockets that you have, would be full of bullion, which would be the precious materials and metals that you had. And time again, you probably heard stories about caravans and different business field trips or whatever people used to do back in the day. There were caravans. They used to go from one city to another, one kingdom to another kingdom. They used to take some booty or some treasure and share it with another king as a show of peace or friendship. And they used to get hijacked. They were robbed quite often. So what happened is that when coins became standardized and people had bullion in their hands, and they were all over Europe, around the world, people had these precious materials and metals with them, they were afraid to go out when they had to make a big purchase. So these coins came from somebody known as the goldsmith. Somebody used to work and used to cut out gold. And they used to make gold bars, they used to make gold coins, and they used to give it out to people and trade and barter. So what people started doing is, they used to go to their local goldsmith. They used to make him or her, usually him back in the day when chauvinism existed, they used to put down their precious metals, gold, and bullion. They used to give it to the goldsmith. And the goldsmith would write down a receipt of this is how much gold this person has deposited. This is how much bullion this person has deposited. And would give them the receipt. And so this person would have a receipt in their hand. No longer heavy baggage, no longer less able to be mobile, quite easily and able to move forward. You have a receipt in your hand. And this was called paper money. So what the blacksmith, the goldsmith, realized and saw after giving out a lot of receipts to people was that people didn't necessarily come back to get the bullion. They kept trading in receipts. In fact, when people bartered and traded and someone would take out some gold or some bullion to give to a person as change, they would say, no, 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 no. We would like some receipts, please. And when this case happened, that goldsmith had an idea. And the goldsmith said that what I can do is, I've got this bullion and I've sent out receipts that match the bullion that I have. But people are not coming back for the bullion. So what we could do is, we could print out receipts and make receipts for bullion that we don't have. People will never know. And that's exactly what they did. So what goldsmiths did was that they became a kind of treasurer for their community. They used to have all the goods, materials, golds, and bullion with them under their possession because they used to have vaults. And so they started printing out receipts that did not have any bullion to back it up. And that is where you could say banking began. Now, of course, we have theories, research that states that 2000 BC, 2500 BC, places such as Assyria. Assyria is basically today North Africa, Egypt. You go down to Turkey, southern part of Turkey, going to Iran and Iraq. These places, back in the day, it was called Assyria. That land was called Assyria. The subcontinent, where you have Pakistan, Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and these other countries around. Sumeria. Sumeria is the eastern part of the world, right before the Orient, right before you have China, Japan, Hong Kong, and all these other places show up. These places used to give out, people who were merchants and businessmen, used to give out grains and crops as loans to people. And then when they would grow their crops and they would grow their farms, they would give back the grains and the loans to these merchants. And that was kind of a loaning system. So yes, that itself was also a banking system. But the name bank and how it came into being was because of that goldsmith who had this idea. So he started printing out receipts. And then one day, everybody's in the street looking at this goldsmith walking downtown. And he used to flaunt how rich he had become. Because of course you have a lot of bullion and you're printing out receipts that have no bullion to match them. So this goldsmith used to look quite rich walking down the street. He'd become a nobleman. People used to call them archdukes. People used to call them dukes. People used to call them princes as well. Not His Royal Highness, not under the lineage of a monarchy, but His Highness, which means somebody who's in an outstanding situation and can be a benefit to society. So these people who were archdukes and dukes used to go around. People started questioning, how did they get so much money? Are they using our bullion? What's happening? And so everybody would go and they would try to find out where the bullion is. So one by one, some people went, and this goldsmith very happily opened his vault and said that there's your bullion. And that person was okay with it. But then when a riot took place a few years down the line, when the entire townspeople, in entirety, the entire populace of that area went to the goldsmith to say, where's our bullion? They didn't have enough bullion to back up the receipts. And that was a term that even today is called when the bank is on the runs. When a bank is on the runs, it means that the bank has given out loans or given out money or given out paper currency that doesn't have value, bullion, to back it up. And that's where an issue starts. So this person ran away. He probably took the bullion with him as well, whatever he could get his hands on. And this was a phenomena that was quite, of course, looked at in a very negative manner. And people thought that this is crazy. How could this person do this to us? But then later on, surprisingly, kings, queens, people who are monarchs, people who were sitting at the top of the table, they thought of this to be a very good strategy, to take bullion from people, print out receipts, give them something, call it currency, call it money, give it to them, while we hold on to the actual valuable goods, the bullion itself, and let them go and do whatever they want to do. And when they do come back, nobody dares question the king. And that's exactly what happened. So you would have archbishops, archdukes, dukes in general, kings and queens, who would order their lands and kingdoms to bring the bullion to them into their vaults. And they would put the bullion there, give out receipts to people, known as paper money today, and have people live their lives. And then slowly but easily that matter died. Rather on, it became institutionalized by modern day society, which today we have banks, we have loans, we have the concept of credit and debit, and we have all these different things happening. Of course, this is way down the line. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who've studied business, a lot of people who are in finance, a lot of bankers as well, who are our dear viewers. And they might even know the situation and the small intricate details as well. But I'm just going through an overview of the different research that is available in books and online. So when this had happened, archdukes in particular were people who were His Highnesses. And they were told that they can print out receipts for other people. And they were in charge of gathering the bullion from their land. This is what an archduke's duty was. This is way back in the 17th century and even before that. And so it brings us to an interesting turn. We know how money came in. We know how bullion was transferred into receipts, which is now today money. Where's the value? What's happening? And Faris's question about going to a bank and saying that I have these many dollars in the bank, can I have the bullion or the value that it stands for, is a valid question where it is. Can it be done? I'm not too sure. We have to think about it. But let's look at a very, very, very imperative moment at that same time when bullion was being gathered by archdukes and these leaders. Dear viewers, the first bank that was ever opened was in Italy. The name of this bank was called Banca Monte dei Paschi di Siena, and it was opened in 1472. Now, obviously, you're thinking if they followed it in the 17th century, how is it opening in the 15th century? It was basically the aspect of giving grains and crops to people and then getting it back later on. But it was institutionalized in 1624, which means the 17th century. The second ever bank that was made was in Germany, and it was called Berenberg Bank, and it was institutionalized and made in the late 1500s, almost when the 1600s and 17th century was beginning, under the Roman Empire. So you have the Roman Empire, you have the ancient Greeks. This is the time when all of these empires, monarchies, dynasties existed, whether they be in China, whether they be in Europe, or somewhere else around the world. And these banks are emerging. And we already know the concept of what they're trying to do. They're trying to take bullion from people, put it into their banks, give people receipts, and have them exchange receipts for the rest of their lives and not question how much bullion they have. So, what ended up happening is that at the same time, the 17th century, if you take a look at history, this is a theory that I read by Jean Redley. It's available on, if you Google search it, you'll probably find a PDF book on it, but it's actually called The Bullion in Time. So go ahead and have a look at it. It's a very interesting book to read as well. And then I did some research on different timelines and when things happened. So shocking enough, now this is a theory, it could be true, it could also be false. You be the judge, think about it. Every single country that went out to colonize, whether it be Great Britain, whether it be Germany, whether it be France, whether it be North American people that went out to conquer, rule, colonize people, all of that took place during the 17th century. In fact, I have timelines for you as well. The first time the Britishers entered into the subcontinent, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, this area known as today, it was 1612 is when they entered with the East India Trading Company. And they set up offices and companies within the subcontinent. And they started ruling and working around their businesses from that area. And then, later on, let's fast forward to 1885. This is when the British Raj began. In fact, it was 1858 to 1947. Now, the question is, they colonized this area. They all began in 1612. The French colonization of different Arab countries, where you have Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, a few others that speak French today as well. They have it as a second language. It started in the 17th century as well, the early 1600s. South Africa, where people came in, movies such as Blood Diamond, where people want to find diamonds and different things in South Africa. Colonization began in 1652. So everything happened in 1700s, in the 17th century. So think about it. You come up with banks and you make a plan. The hierarchy, the monarchy, the dynasties, the leaders on top say that we want the bullion from people and we'll put them on the path of paper money, which is something that represents value to it. And then whenever the bank is on the runs and they don't have enough bullion, where do they come up with that bullion? How will they have that bullion to give back to people or to continue business? A theory? Go out and take it from other people. So colonization. A lot of people label colonization to be something of the fact that people had diseases in different countries. So colonizers came to help and educate people. People say that there was trading and merchants going on and they didn't know how to contain and run business. So colonizers came. People say that medicine and things were backward at the time. So colonizers came to help them. There are various theories. But here's the question. You had colonizers in the subcontinent. The Britishers were there. Did they take bullion? Did they, in fact, take jewelry, gold, or whatever natural resources, valuable goods that the subcontinent had? If the answer is no, then this theory is wrong. But if the answer is yes, it might just be valid. South Africa, 1652, colonizers came. Did they take bullion? Did they make people work and get diamonds for them? We have movies and documentaries about this stuff. If they did, then this theory might be right. And so, play on to the future, these dynasties, monarchies, and colonizers stayed in those countries for 300, 400 years. They stayed there, trying to get as much bullion as they could, making people work for them, making them think about something else, making them feel that they've come for one reason when they were there for another. Confusing people, giving them prejudiced thoughts, making them feel as though they were superior to them, or making them feel as though we're educating you. We're here to give you a new platform. Colonizing them and making them speak their own language, giving them their own culture, making them integrate with them in some way or form, but not completely, just enough so that we can get by and communicate. And they were taking bullion at the back. They had people who were taking bullion. And so it's said that they took the bullion, all the countries that colonized, and they put them in different reserves and vaults in different countries. But the story comes to, okay, so these people colonized. Number one, the question is, why did they colonize? A theory is because of bullion. There are several other theories that say some other reasons. You be the judge. But in the 1900s, these colonizers left. 1947, they left the subcontinent. 1950s, 60s to 70s, they left the Arab region. The French left. 1965, 64 in South Africa, the colonizers left. Of course, there are different dates that are mentioned by different researchers, but that is something that still restricts you to the 20th century, 1900 afterwards. So they came and they left in the 1900s. Why did they leave in the 1900s? Did they finish the bullion? Was everything done? Did they think that the people of that land found out that they were taking their bullion and started having protests? They called them rebels, and they said that they're going against the queen, against the king, against the monarchy. What is the reason of their leaving? We have one story, a very factual story. And this is of somebody who was an archduke. If you remember, what was the archduke supposed to do? Gather bullion. His name was Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, the Austro-Hungarian Empire that was going on. This person was assassinated by a 19-year-old boy in 1914. And they say that this is the start of World War I. And of course, people have different reasons of why this person was assassinated. Maybe there were unrests going on, there were rebels against the government or the ruling party at the time. There are definitely a lot of theories. And I'm nobody to say which theory is right and which is wrong. The only thing I can do is I can present in front of you some research that might also be valid. So the Archduke, a person who, by definition, when we were taking a look at a goldsmith, being given the title of Archduke, His Highness, or being a nobleman, and with the royal family, giving titles to different people, or making them heir apparents, or even within their families, when they made somebody an archduke, somebody who could be in the hierarchy, and to reach and become an heir apparent. This gentleman, well, I don't know if he was a gentleman, but Archduke Franz was assassinated in 1914 in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1914. And some events later on, unrest took place and World War I started. Now, a lot of people say that World War I happened for various reasons. The theory that I'm putting in front of you, which might be right, which might be wrong, is that it happened because of bullion. Valued items were being taken from people. Colonizers were going to different countries and taking their bullion from them so they could fill up their own vaults back home. And this was increasing. And in 1914, some child had enough of it. Of course, they mentioned the group called the Black Hand. Now, maybe it sounds like a group of people who are rebels, people who might be of a mafia, gangster type of situation, I'm not sure. But somebody assassinated the Archduke, and World War I began. On the outset of the World War I, unrest remained. It remained so much so that different countries, different ruling authorities, different colonizers started leaving. They started giving what the first thing that colonizers started to do after the Archduke was shot, World War I came to a bit of an end, when the treaty was signed and there was supposedly supposed to be peace around, was that people who were colonizers started giving the colonized land and the people that were already there, the natives of that land, more authority, just to make them think that we're being kind and we're being progressive and we educated you and now it's your turn to take the reins. And so when it started up, unrest still remained, people were still confused, World War II took place. Now, of course, a lot of people have different reasons and a variety of causes of why World War II happened, but some people say it's because of the banks that were opened around in different locations around the world, and they were taking all the bullion from people. And so a rise of a leader might have been because of the fact that they didn't have bullion, or they wanted bullion back, or they wanted this anarchy, this colonization aspect to come to an end. There are a lot of theories out there. You be the judge. And that brings us to present time. So you had World War I, you had World War II, you had the Cold War from 1947 up until 1991. You had the Korean War, which also happened in the 1900s. You had the Cold War, which took place from 1947 up until 1991. All these different wars, all these different things that have happened, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, all these different nuclear bombs and conflicts that have taken place in this world, most and majority of them have happened within the 1900s. Why is that so? Were people catching on that they were losing bullion because of their colonizers? Was there actual unrest? Was there a dispute between anarchy and government? What was going on? So at the end of the day, when these colonizers left, they left by doing one particular thing. They left in such a way that they started imposing travel restrictions when they noticed and they saw that people from these colonized lands are now coming into this country. So they started imposing travel restrictions. Of course, they were probably very minor back in the day, but slowly but easily, if you come to today, how easy is it for somebody in this world to go and get a visa of another country if he or she requires a visa? How much paperwork do you have to show? How many times do you have to prove that you have a link to back home? I'm not going to go there and live there or be settled there. I'm not going to break any rules or laws. Of course, a lot of people say this is because of safety. This is because people have done this. They've gotten visas and they've gone and they've never returned to their countries. There are a lot of reasons out there. But restrictions didn't start because of these reasons. They started much before them. Obviously, the restrictions are of a different kind. And today they've normalized and standardized into something else. And because one valid reason exists, that somebody went to a country with a visa and never went back to his own home country, people might use that as an excuse. It might be a cover-up as well. It's also a valid reason, probably. But what is it that is happening today that is causing the entire world, this global village? You have your mobile phone, you can go on it and you can have a look at news, articles, videos from all over the world. Yet traveling has become an issue. Obtaining a visa has become an issue. And so when these restrictions were imposed by the colonizer, it was probably because, this is a theory, that they didn't want those people to come and take their bullion back. Because if they come onto our shore and they come onto our land, they'll probably find out that we took their bullion. And if they find out that we took their bullion, we might have a war over here, just like there was one when we were colonizing that country. And so they got afraid and scared. And so they started imposing restrictions. In fact, they started indulging in further wars. And they started indulging in further issues. In fact, they started making their colonized people busy and put their mind to other issues amongst themselves, amongst other countries that were neighboring them, and which till date exist. So people don't want us to focus on the bigger picture sometimes. Sometimes they want us to focus on something else so they can get away with it. Is this true? Obviously. It's a theory. I've probably said a theory a few times today on this show, just to let you know that this is on the strength of some research that is available online. Jean Redrell, who's a very, very, very prominent author, and he's a historian as well. He talks about the bullion in times. Have a look at that as well. It's quite important to see. But at the end of the day, the way we see it is, how I can sum this up, is banking started. Bullion was stored. Colonizing began. Bullion was taken. Colonies were left behind. Travel restrictions were imposed. So it's like me walking into your house, taking your valuables, leaving your house, leaving you be as you are, storing the things in my house, and denying you access into my house unless you meet a certain criteria. And that criteria could be, you're not allowed to take anything from here, you're not allowed to live here, you're not allowed to do this, you can't go to this room, you can't go to that room. That's basically how it sounds. So after people had bullion, and they took bullion from other people, today, you can see it in currencies. What do I mean by this? Some currencies in this world are quite strong. So a US dollar might equate to some X amount of rupees, or X amount of dinars, rials, ringgits, dongs, and vice versa. So it could very well be that those countries that today are suffering because of their economies and have low value of money, and their currency is quite low, but they have a rich history. If you take a look at these countries, they do have a rich history. If you take a look at the Asian area, if you take a look at the subcontinent, South Africa, the Caribbeans, all these different areas, they have a very rich history. History where people were taught, history that even the colonizers learned from. So if they had such a rich history, and they were so stable right before colonizing began, maybe, just maybe, their bullion was taken. If that is correct, I'd like you to think about it. So today the question is, can you go to a bank, tell them that I have this amount of money in the bank, can you give me my bullion? I'll leave that for you to decide. Thank you very much for tuning in. We hope to see you next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Think about it.